Tonight, is the economic war against Russia failing? Just days to go till the presidential elections, Vladimir Putin is running effectively unopposed. So is it even possible to hit him where it hurts? Sky News can reveal yet another loophole allowing rich Russians to buy new luxury cars, even though they're banned. Tonight, we'll ask what's the point of sanctions if they don't work? That's as the US confirmed it was sending $300 million in weapons to help the Ukraine war effort, the first since funding ran out. Also tonight, a criminal investigation, $40 billion shaved off the share price. So is Boeing in big trouble? This evening, I'll hear from the father of a young woman who died when a Boeing plane crashed 5 years ago. And later on in the program, Haiti's gang leader claims victory after the country's prime minister confirmed he would step down. We'll report again from the capital, where there were celebrations on the streets when that was announced. Plus, find out why the man who questioned Joe Biden's memory has been attacked by both sides in Washington. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. Is there any point imposing sanctions on Russia? I ask that question because after Russia invaded Ukraine, the UK, US and the EU pledged to wage economic war on Moscow. Well, a few weeks ago, we showed you one loophole being exploited and the resulting huge spike in exports to countries neighbouring Russia. Well, tonight we bring you another Sky News exclusive exposé on how Russia's rich are still managing to buy new luxury cars, Bentleys, Range Rovers, Ferraris, even though they're on the banned list. This latest revelation is forcing the government here to rethink its sanctions regime and comes just days before Vladimir Putin is likely to be voted into office again. And as Russia prepares to go to the polls, the war in Ukraine is grinding on. Even today, an attack was launched inside Russian borders by exiles backed by Kiev. So if the sanctions aren't tough enough, if Vladimir Putin is almost certain to remain president, is Russia effectively acting with impunity? We'll discuss that all tonight. But let's get started with an exclusive report from our data and economics editor, Ed Conway.
You don't have to go far in Moscow without seeing evidence of how much Russians love luxury goods. And that includes a lot of high-end Western brands and especially British automobiles.
Bentley.
After the invasion of Ukraine and the imposition of sanctions in 2022, that was all supposed to stop. Car makers pledged not to send their new models there. But a Sky News investigation has found these exports seem to be continuing even now.
Now, it's certainly true that UK car exports to Russia have fallen very sharply since the invasion, basically down to zero. But just look at what's happened over the same period with car exports to Azerbaijan. They have gone up at an unprecedented rate, into the hundreds of millions each year, up by 1,860%. We've never seen anything like that at all, raising the question, is something going on in Azerbaijan's economy? Well, not really. Developing economy, GDP about the same size as Ghana, 10 million people. But the main thing is, just look where it's sited, on the border of Russia. And when you look at what's happened to car exports from Azerbaijan to Russia since the invasion, they've done almost exactly the same thing as our exports to Azerbaijan. And that raises a final question. Where have our exports mainly come from? Well, the main port of departure is this one in the southwest of England.
Up until the invasion of Ukraine, the port of Bristol had never seen more than a few £1 million of exports to Azerbaijan. In the past couple of years, that's risen to the hundreds of millions.
This is one of the country's main ports for the import and export of cars. But among the models leaving here over the past 2 years have been thousands of high-end British cars going in vessels rather like that around Europe into the Black Sea and ending up almost certainly in Russia. Our data shows it's been happening. The question is why it hasn't been stopped.
After all, the sale of cars over £42,000 to Russia is explicitly banned under the UK's sanctions regime. Britain's motoring lobby group, the SMMT, said UK vehicle manufacturers are committed to full compliance with all current and future trade sanctions. There is no available evidence to indicate a lack of compliance with existing sanctions, but manufacturers will remain vigilant and will condemn any party that puts their commitment to compliance at risk. But talking in Parliament today, the Foreign Office Minister who deals with sanctions said this was a wake-up call for business.
Sets out very clearly that they shouldn't be doing business, obviously, with Russia or potentially with a third country that might support Russia. So as these things appear, as indeed the Sky report by Ed Conway has come out today, if it appears that there is a diversionary activity to sell goods that have a potential both dual use and value, then there is a need for those businesses to consider their position, and for DBT and now the Office of Trade team to have conversations with them to see whether they are legitimately didn't think anything of it, or whether there is something which needs dealing with.
The Azerbaijani car exports are just a fraction of those Britain sends around the world, but it's a fraction that looks increasingly awkward for a country which has said it wants to wage economic war on Russia.
And Ed joins us now. And Ed, this is the second part of this exceptional investigation that you have done. There's a lot of information coming out of our way. What do we know for sure?
Well, all of this is based, Yalda, on the official data that we get from the government. They have to collect every consignment that's leaving the country, coming in. It's the customs data. So it is there in the open, although it's sometimes hard to kind of dig through it. And what we know from that is there have been extraordinary changes in the movement of goods. Stuff that normally would be going to Russia seems to be going to other places on Russia's doorstep. And from that point onwards, well, we have some evidence that it is passing through to Russia. We've talked before about the kinds of goods, dual-use goods, that could well be turned into weapons. Here it's more a question of luxury goods, trying to starve people in the upper echelons of Russian society who might be financing the war campaign against Ukraine, trying to starve them of the kinds of things that they rather like. And I mentioned, when it comes to cars, there is this specific rule that says you can't sell anything over £42,000 to Russia. Let me just show you, actually, what those statistics tell you about what is actually going into Azerbaijan, because here's that limit, OK? So this is the £42,000 sanction limit that says don't sell cars anything above that. Now look at where Azerbaijan is. This is the average value of cars being sold to Azerbaijan over the last few years. It is £107,000, just under £107,000. If you think about that, these are expensive cars. And actually, to put that into context, you're talking about similar levels to what you see the average car going to Bahrain, the average car going to Saudi Arabia, to Oman, expensive places. Interestingly, though, look at this, that's Kazakhstan. And there's reason to believe there's a similar thing happening here, a sudden uptick in exports of cars to Kazakhstan that might previously have been going to Russia. But it is relatively brazen. There's no secret about it. If you're in Moscow, you can, and this is showing you just from a Bentley dealership, not directly owned by Bentley, it's worth saying, but nonetheless, selling Bentley cars in Moscow right now, and they say these are models which are 2023 models. In other words, so since the invasion, these models have been made in the UK. And it's there in the data, it's there in the anecdotes, and we've talked to a lot of people, within Russia who say, well, this looks like the way that you get hold of cars right now. It's pretty clear.
It's clear there are many who are saying this is all a grey area, but the facts are that there are sanctions in place. And the question then is, what is the government doing about it?
Well, I mean, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, who's the Minister at the Foreign Office, who's dealing with this, says that businesses need to look closer at their supply chains. I'm sure that's certainly the case. I think the government also should be examining this data more. We have looked at the data. It is pretty clear there are some patterns which should be examined. But if you are a car maker and suddenly you have never done business with Azerbaijan before, or maybe Kazakhstan, and you see that go up from maybe a few millions, a few hundreds, thousands a year into the tens of millions, which is what's happened, then I think reasonably you might ask yourself the question, are these cars really going to end up in Azerbaijan or are they going somewhere else? And that seems, from the data, to be the case.
Absolutely extraordinary. Ed, thank you so much. Ed Conway there. Well, let's speak now to Garry Kasparov, a former Russian world chess champion and political activist who's recently been added to Moscow's terrorists and extremists list. Thank you so much, Garry, for joining us here on the programme. You're also the co-founder of the World Liberty Congress, which represents dissidents around the world. We have just done this exclusive investigation into how Russia and the neighbouring countries are evading the sanctions. I guess the big question is, how do you punish autocrats when they do know how to evade sanctions?
Thank you for inviting me. And I'm surprised that it took 2 years for you to discover that Putin's regime found ways to evade sanctions and others to benefit on it. Through our network of World Liberty Congress, that included in our region Central Asian countries and Azerbaijan and, of course, Russia and Belarus, the countries that are run by dictators, we collected a lot of data. And Azerbaijan, by the way, it's a tiny bit. Yes, it's luxury cars. You should look at Kazakhstan. You should look at Kyrgyzstan.
We have looked at Kazakhstan actually a couple of weeks ago.
The only way is to actually recognize that we're at war, because there's no way to stop business. It's not just Great Britain. You look at Germany, Estonia, Finland, even the countries with the most pro-Ukrainian position, they cannot legally stop their businesses selling to the third countries unless there is a clear position about the economic war on Russia. And it's always
and we can see, I mean, ultimately, this economic war is not really impacting Russia's economy. It's certainly not the way that Vladimir Putin is going to sell it to his people as we watch him win another election in the coming days.
Because it's not a war. I mean, let's make it very clear. The free world is not at war with Putin. Whatever they say, it's just blah, blah, blah. So back your words with actions. Number one is oil. 60% of Russian oil goes from the north. Stop these shadow tankers, because most of Russian oil now is traded by tankers without stateless tankers. They go through Denmark. So impose a prohibitive tax on it. So start thinking how to cut financial flow of Putin's Russia. Again, it's about strategy. If the strategy is to win the war, you always find a way.
Garry, you say this, and we've also heard Yulia Navalnaya, Alexei Navalny's wife, say that the sanctions are ridiculous. It was a joke, especially after the death of her husband. You're also saying, why has it taken us 2 years to discover that these sanctions are being evaded? If you know this, your network knows this, the entire community following this knows this, why isn't anything being done to change this?
Because we can only put your attention to the facts. But at the end of the day, it's about strategy that has been developed in Washington and London, in Brussels, in Berlin, in Paris. And so far, all of the leaders of the free world failed to say 3 simple words: Ukraine must win, which means Russia must lose. And then when you establish this simple strategy, you start working toward it. As of today, it's all somewhere in the middle. It's a very shadow.
I guess, I mean, if you look at what's happened today, the US says they're going to put a new weapons package that's worth $300 million to Ukraine. Is that sufficient? I mean, given the flow of weapons, I know it's been delayed. I know the Ukrainians are frustrated. But is this better than nothing?
No, it's better than nothing. But fighting Russia, it's not enough. Again, strategy includes many components. And of course, the most important one, to undermine Putin's military machine. And again, oil and gas, those are the 2 key components that keep, fueling Putin's war machine. And literally nothing has been done. Putin is getting more money from oil and gas exports than before the war.
We know that you also were thinking of, at your World Liberty Congress today, Alexei Navalny. Many have said that with him went the future of Russia as well. How do you feel at present following the death of Alexei Navalny? Given, of course, you're now on this terrorist list as well.
Yeah, exactly. So we all on a list of terrorists, extremists, foreign agents. But Alexei Navalny believed that future of Russia would depend on someone or groups of people working inside Russia. He had this romantic belief that something could be done within the dictatorial regime, and he paid the highest price for his belief. And it's proved, unfortunately, an unfortunate truth that we have to start working from outside. And it's very important that the free world now will start doing something with Russians like me and many others who are willing to create an alternative, like a Free France of de Gaulle. So there are millions of us living outside. And we should become a component of anti-Putin global coalition that should help Ukraine winning the war and eventually Putin regime to go down. This is a simple thing that the free world must recognize. You cannot compromise with Putin. There's no compromise with dictators that reach this stage of oppression and murder and devastation.
Yeah, Garry Kasparov, we're always grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
With me in the studio tonight, the global affairs journalist Tara Kangarlou and Edward Lucas, Senior Fellow at the Centre for European Policy Analysis. Thank you both for joining us here on the programme. Tara, I'll come to you. I mean, you can hear the frustration there in Garry Kasparov's voice, the fact that he's saying, why didn't you guys talk about this 2 years ago, that they're aware that these sanctions were being evaded and, frankly, the West was doing nothing about it.
Of course, in the earlier days, Ukraine also said, that Russia is evading sanctions by way of Azerbaijan, Armenia, the neighboring countries. And, Yalda, I can't help but to think of Iran and the Iranian regime and how they have been evading sanctions over the years for as long as decades, as long as I can remember. And when you think about authoritarian regimes, dictatorships, they find a way to surpass sanctions, to set up illicit channels, to have shell accounts and businesses all over the world to do their business. In fact, they are further emboldened in most cases, and it's only the ordinary people who bear the brunt. And again, it's 2 years into this level of sanctions against Russia, but certainly sanctions never weaken those who are aimed to be weakened.
And we are seeing a more emboldened Russia than we have in the last couple of years. I mean, I interviewed the Russian ambassador here in the UK, and there was a sort of feeling that they are coming out on top of this after, everything that's happened in the last couple of years. And, of course, with the Russians going into an election, we do expect Vladimir Putin to win that election.
First of all, I don't think you should use the word election for what's happening in Russia.
Well, I mean, they want to call it, we know the outcome.
Election implies a degree of uncertainty and contestation and choice, which is wholly absent from this political farce. Call it tragedy or comedy, but it's not an election.
And Russia push you on that, though. Why feign an election? Why bother going through this process when we know the outcome?
Because the Putin regime likes to have the pretense of legitimacy. And even in North Korea, they have elections. And there's a benchmark. They want 75% turnout, 75% of the vote, and so on. But I think the big point is Russia doesn't take us seriously. They don't take us seriously in terms of our criticism of what's going on inside Russia, and they don't take us seriously in terms of our opposition to what they're doing to Ukraine. And I'm afraid they're right to, because we dither, we prevaricate, we want Ukraine not completely to lose, but we're scared of Russia and we don't want to give Ukraine what it needs to win. And when it comes to sanctions, we want sanctions that will make us look good, but we still want to be able to buy Russian oil, and our businesses, shamefully, still want to sell cars and luxury goods and all sorts of other things to the regime. And I would say to the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, who you quoted at the end of that excellent piece by Ed Conway, just sit down and watch that film that won the Oscar, 20 Days in Mariupol. And when you've watched it, just look at yourself in the mirror and say, I sold cars to the people who did that.
But do we think that's going to happen? I mean, you've just mentioned Iran, the fact that for decades they've been able to work around these sanctions.
No, of course it's happening. It's happening, it has happened, and it will happen. And I'll just give you an example. If a Mercedes-Benz is $10, in Europe, it's $100 in Iran. And guess what? That money is being pocketed by people who are propagating the worst against the people of that country, and this would be the case elsewhere in the world that's under sanctions by world power. And if I may, I want to add this tad bit about the impact of sanctions domestically, Yalda. Again, autocrats and dictators play off of this narrative that, look, we're victims, we're being victimized, and for large demographics, that also plays into this victimization of of, these countries like Russia, like Iran, North Korea, Myanmar, that look what the West is doing to us. And I think, it's a key fact that the world should be wary of.
And yet, they also sell the narrative that they're surviving. They're able to take on the West. If we just look at this US, this new weapons package, $300 million in Ukraine is what the Biden administration has pledged, but this isn't nearly enough. I mean, it sounds like a lot, but it's not enough, given that they need to wage this war and continue to fight the Russians.
It's always too little, and it's always very late. And the price for that is paid by tens of thousands of Ukrainians who are dead and maimed, and widowed or orphaned. And the West's geopolitical education about the real nature of the Putin regime and the real problem we face with Russia should have started 30 years ago. We're only now beginning to get to grips with the problem we have. And the price for that education is not paid by us right now, it's paid by Ukrainians. But the world is really, really dangerous as a result. There's a chance Ukraine will lose, and then we will face Russian imperialism going after the Baltic states, which are parts of NATO, and we will be in the most dangerous superpower confrontation in any of our lifetimes, and it will be our fault.
Well, just yesterday, the Pope said, maybe we should negotiate with Russia and talk peace. Donald Trump has said, I can end this war in 24 hours. In fact, Viktor Orban said that he heard from Donald Trump that, I'm not going to give a penny to the Ukrainians if I'm elected.
I think one's got to be careful about taking the internal campaign rhetoric in the United States and transposing it directly onto the post-election foreign policy. It's worth remembering that during the previous Trump presidency, the American military presence in Europe went up and it went down under Obama. It's also worth remembering it was the Trump administration that actually sent the vital weapons to Ukraine at the start of the war that helped them win. So obviously I worry about Trump's rhetoric, and he's no friend of
But what he says versus what the administration did last time.
Trump doesn't like losers, and if he sees the chance that Ukraine can win, then I think he'll continue to support Ukraine. And that means it's particularly important that we, right now, start sending Ukraine the money, the ammunition, the long-range weapons, all the other things that they need, so that by the end of the year, they're on the front foot, not on the back foot.
Edward, Tara, we're just going to go to the next segment and our break, but we'll keep you right here. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come, the aircraft manufacturer back in the spotlight. Boeing has denied cutting costs by compromising on safety, but it's been criticised by regulators. Stay with us.
I think there's two reasons. One is Major League Cricket, which was a league that started last year, and that is T20. And the knock-on effect of that is America's one of the hosts of the T20 World Cup, and that's going to see America involved, but also India-Pakistan, one of the fiercest rivalries in cricket, and that takes place in New York. And T20's fast, it's furious, it's all action, and it's attracting big crowds in new stadiums, or stadiums also that are still being built, including in Los Angeles. And the stadiums are being packed because the tickets are affordable, because there's a number of South Asian expats in particular in the United States of America that are packing those stadiums out. And then because it's fast and furious and all action, we're getting a lot of baseball fans attending as well, because they see the crossover. But unlike in baseball, which drags on for 3.5 hours and sometimes doesn't even have a home run, there's a 6 every other minute in this T20 format. And I think a lot of the baseball fans are enjoying that. In the United States of America, the streaming hasn't traditionally always been conducive in terms of when you want to get up and your working hours. But a lot of those that live in America, and we should say Canada as well, are starting to realize from highlights and from social media in particular, when they see maybe a big 6 and they think, wow, that's interesting. And suddenly they watch it again and again, they look up the rules, and then they realize maybe there's a stadium down the road. These new Major League Cricket teams are on both coasts and centrally as well. You've got Los Angeles, you've got New York, you've got San Francisco, you've got Seattle, you've got Texas, and you've got Washington. So maybe what you see online prompts people to go with their families as well, because the stadiums are very accessible and the tickets compared to baseball, for example, are very cheap.
Welcome back. It's lost 25% of its value as incident after incident raised safety concerns. Boeing has always been in a battle to keep up its reputation. Sorry, let's go again. Compromising on safety, something it strongly denies. It seems one of the world's biggest aircraft manufacturers can't catch a break. Boeing, already suffering from concerns over the safety of its planes. A number of high-profile incidents, and now a whistleblower confirmed dead. It's a company and chief executive insistent on one message.
We fly safe planes. We don't put airplanes in the air that we don't have 100% confidence in.
So what's the timeline on Boeing's turbulence? Boeing designs, assembles, and sells commercial jets. But the company has come under scrutiny after incidents like this. Losing a tire mid-takeoff in March, a United Airlines flight forced into an emergency landing. Days later, 50 injured after a flight to Sydney lost control mid-air.
I looked up to see the gentleman that was sitting next to me on the roof of the plane.
And now confirmation that a whistleblower has been found dead due in court in June. Coroners say John Barnett died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He worked for Boeing for more than 30 years as a quality inspector. But why did John Barnett come forward? Let's run it back to 2018. Boeing grounded its entire fleet of 737 MAX planes after 2 crashes over 2 years killed all the passengers and crew members. Mr. Barnett alleged 2 major things: that up to a quarter of the oxygen systems on Boeing planes could be faulty, and defective parts were deliberately fitted to planes to cut corners. Boeing denies both claims. And this year, those safety concerns have re-emerged. The company faces a criminal investigation.
Boeing has not provided us with the documents and information that we have requested numerous times over the past few months.
That's after this incident in January. A door plug blew off a Boeing 737 MAX 9 Alaska Airlines aircraft. It left a gaping hole in the plane, and a report later emerged 4 bolts essential for safety could have been missing entirely. Another instance that month.
Oh my God, it's on fire.
A Boeing 747 seen erupting in flames over Miami. It's shaved more than $40 billion off the company's market valuation. And a federal investigation found multiple instances where the company allegedly failed to comply with quality control. Boeing insists all their planes are safe.
Make sure that we convey our message and all the work that we're doing in our faith, in our people, and our airplanes.
But with each incident and each headline, it'll only keep getting more difficult to convince regulators, airlines, and passengers. Well, Boeing say staff are continuously working to ensure safety and quality, but not everyone agrees. Earlier, I spoke to Michael Stumo, who lost his daughter in a plane accident 5 years ago.
Just she was intelligent, charismatic, caring, caring about family, caring about people, caring about global health. She would have been a star in global health. And part of our future, I mean, she died that day, part of our future died that day. And yeah, we will never be the same.
Your life's mission now is to hold, those responsible for this crash accountable and to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again. And yet we do see these sorts of incidents, although when you think about what happened with the Alaska Airlines, that didn't cause any deaths, but these are incredibly dangerous things that continue to happen.
Yes, the Lion Air crash in Indonesia in 2018 was the first crash. Nobody did anything. Boeing blamed the pilots. The second crash killed my daughter in Ethiopia on March 10th, 2019. We want no third crash. The Alaska Airlines blowout, we knew something was going to happen because there's been huge quality issues, alarm bells ringing everywhere. Very sad for the people on that flight, but very glad nobody died and that there's appropriate focus on Boeing and its production quality now.
And of course, one of the whistleblowers, John Barnett, unfortunately, we understand that he has now died, which of course, adds to the tragedy of this entire situation and fiasco.
And I'm very sad for John's family and for what he went through. He had a lot of stress trying to hold Boeing accountable, and it's destroyed his living, his life, and we don't know what happened. Depositions can be very stressful with lawyers attacking who you are, but we don't know what happened.
Well, Michael, we're really grateful that you've joined us here on the programme. Thank you so much. That was Michael Strumo there. Well, this is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up, what happens next in Haiti? The country's prime minister says he'll resign, but will it end weeks of widespread violence? Welcome back. Yesterday, we reported on the deteriorating situation in Haiti. The country's Prime Minister Ariel Henry has now said he'll resign after weeks of mounting pressure and widespread gang violence. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has met with Caribbean leaders in Jamaica to push for a solution to the ongoing crisis. Here's our US correspondent, Mark Stone.
Right now, on these streets, he is in charge. Barbecue, they call him. Jimmy Chiritse, the leader of a collective of gangs, street fighters who have effectively pulled off a coup. Today we are telling the international community to give Haiti a chance. We Haitians have to decide who is going to lead the country and what model of government we want. He was reacting from the streets to the resignation of the Prime Minister, prevented from returning to his own country, forced to step down in neighbouring Puerto Rico. The government I am running, he said, will remove itself immediately after the establishment of a transitional presidential council. The images from the past week reflect this slide into chaos. At the approach road to the country's main airport, they run for cover. The army still controls it, but it remains closed to flights. No way to escape, no aid coming in. The seaport has reportedly reopened after government forces pushed gangs back, but at a cost. The number of dead and injured continues to rise. The US Secretary of State joined an urgent meeting of regional leaders in Jamaica this week, a collective effort to install a transitional government and a path to elections. And at the US State Department, the spokesman hinted at the big concern for America.
But certainly we have seen a very unstable security situation, and we know that what often happens when you have an unstable security situation, as you reference in the question, is an increase in people attempting to flee the country.
It is the alignment of rival gangs together fighting government forces which has prompted this latest turn for a country that's been failing for years. These are images from a gang leader's drone, spotting government military vehicles, tracking the movement of an army from the air. And this is a moment from last week's prison break when gangs freed thousands. Government forces on the roof, again, gangs spotting their targets. Last year, Sky News toured the streets and alleys controlled by barbecue. A former policeman, self-cast now as a Robin Hood for the people here, but cast by others as a straightforward gangster. He is internationally sanctioned. He denies links to numerous murders. His message now that the Haitian people will hold their nation's destiny, but it's one being driven, for now, by him. Mark Stone, Sky News.
Let's go to America now. Joe Biden has come under increasing pressure over whether he's fit to run for president again. Today, former US Special Counsel Robert Hur defended his report, which found the president had significantly limited memory. Let's have a listen.
My assessment in the report about the relevance of the president's memory was necessary and accurate and fair. Most importantly, what I wrote is what I believe the evidence shows and what I expect jurors would perceive and believe. I did not sanitize my explanation, nor did I disparage the president unfairly. I explained to the Attorney General my decision and the reasons for it. That's what I was required to do.
Robert Hur there. Well, let's go to our US correspondent, James Matthews, who joins us from Washington. And James, Robert Hur has defended his findings, but obviously has also been attacked by both parties. Just remind our audiences again what this report is all about.
Yeah, Robert Hur was the special counsel who was looking into Joe Biden's possession of classified material as it related to his time as vice president. And material was found in his Wilmington residence and elsewhere. So Robert Hur, 6 weeks ago, published a report that said this was the case, that he'd willfully retained classified material, but he wouldn't be pursuing charges because, and in his words, he described Joe Biden as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. He said that's how Biden would be perceived by a jury, and he couldn't get a conviction past a jury who would view him in that light. You'll remember the storm it caused. The White House was incandescent. Joe Biden held a very angry impromptu news conference inside the White House, at which he appeared to be confused again, compounding the whole issue. So this report very much framed fresh debate about Joe Biden's mental sharpness and suitability for office. Today, he was hauled before the Judiciary Committee. He said a number of interesting things, principally defending himself, but also, interesting points without necessarily breaking into a news story, Yalda. I'll run through a couple. He was asked, did you find that Joe Biden was senile? He said he did not. He spoke about how Joe Biden shared details with a ghostwriter. When that ghostwriter found out a special counsel was being appointed, he deleted the files that were shared. He was asked, was Joe Biden exonerated by you? And Robert Hur's answer to that was no. But I think principally, Yalda, if the big question about today was whether or not Hur's testimony would further drive debate around Joe Biden and suitability for office, I think no. I think he was pretty flat, playing with a straight bat, and I don't think it injects much traction into that debate, allied to the fact that just a few days ago, Biden gave a State of the Union address at which he was seen to be on his game.
James, thank you so much for bringing us up to date and for all of your analysis there. Well, let's bring in our panellists this evening. Global Affairs journalist Tara Kangarlou and Edward Lucas, Senior Fellow at the Centre for European Policy Analysis. Tara, James sort of talked there about the storm that that report initially sort of created when this discussion around Joe Biden, his age, memory, forgetting things, describing him as an elderly man. I mean, that was hugely damaging then, and I guess it still lingers today.
Definitely. First of all, I want to say, talking about age is not necessarily ageism, right? And I think there's nothing wrong to talk about age and whether or not someone is fit to serve as president of the United States. But I want to go back to your reporter's comment about the State of the Union. Last week, President Biden, whether or not you agree on his policies, he gave a strong State of the Union. And I think his campaign needs to continue doing that. They need to build a strong narrative on what was done, what needs to be done, and how we're going to get there. And I think he needs to engage the disengaged voters. That's the issue with Biden's campaign right now.
Is that enough, though? You know, we keep talking about the State of the Union and how he was on good form. We have, though, seen him mix up countries, leaders. It is a high-pressure job, but there are also a lot of expectations on the US president.
I think the first thing to say is that the vast majority, more than 2/3 of American voters, don't like the choice they're given. They don't like the Biden versus Trump alternatives. And I think it's astonishing that the Democratic Party has not been able to find someone more credible to take on Trump, because Trump has a lot of negatives. I think that the big point about Biden is not this particular thing. That's a kind of a storm, but a storm in a teacup, really. The big point is that he is so vulnerable, he's so fragile to a really bad misstep once the American voters really start concentrating on this. And if he makes a big public blunder in the weeks before the election, that could be a game changer, a election campaign killer for him. And all his team are on edge about that. And it won't matter then that he did a fantastic State of the Union address. That's kind of what you expect from a president, to be able to do that. And of course, by then it's too late. There is a chance still in the summer, come the Democratic Convention, that we may see some kind of switch. Biden can say, you know what, I don't want to do it. I've talked to Jill. She says no. You know, I take her advice.
Could that, I mean, do we think that...
It's not a huge chance, but the chance is there. Once the campaign is really going, then it's too late.
I mean, 8 or 7 months of a campaign, a grueling campaign.
And I want to throw in another thing in there, is that there might be a third person. There might be an independent coming from somewhere that may not have a chance to winning, but guess what? Would take the votes from the states that their votes would matter to Biden.
That would hurt Biden far more than Trump, and I don't think there's. And we remember with long memories. Maybe remember John Anderson's campaign, Ross Perot. Actually, the Green Ralph Nader and Jill Stein running as third-party candidates probably cost the Democrats precious votes in previous contests. But I think that the Trump base is very energised, and the Trump vote will not be split, whereas the Biden base is not energised, and therefore there's a greater danger that a third candidate might split.
And I would say that the Biden campaign should focus on the Republicans who are not voting for Trump and see how they can get their vote and not have them stay out.
Well, we will continue this conversation, no doubt, throughout the year until we get to November. Tara, Edward, thank you very much for joining us. Well, neither Biden nor Trump are close to retiring. Coming up, what do you do once you've left the hardest job in the world? We'll be talking about how different US presidents spent their days after the White House.
And coming up on Sky News at 10 with me, Anna Botting. After a day of intense criticism, tonight the Prime Minister calls the alleged comments by a Tory donor about Diane Abbott racist and wrong. We'll have the latest from Hull after suspected human ashes were discovered at a funeral parlour where 35 bodies were removed by police last week. And a court in Romania approves the extradition of controversial social media influencer Andrew Tate back to Britain. Plus, we'll have a first look at tomorrow's front pages in the press preview. See you at 10.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music. They're going to cross to us live in a minute. Okay. Thank you so much. Brad Pitt is now a prolific producer behind the scenes.
It's not a mystery to me. We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that? Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited, Tom Cruise. This is the story of the night.
It's the little independent film that could.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well? I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. Nobody could quite believe that it had happened. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
Are you pleased that you did say yes to the job?
I've never regretted it.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me.
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
I've had a great time here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Welcome back. Now, what do you do when you retire from probably the most important job in the world? Well, different presidents have had different ideas about life after the White House. Have a look.
I am disappointed tonight, but I have not lost either love.
Every one of you can be a complete success.
My days in this office are nearly through, but my days of service, I hope, are not.
It's a great gift to be able to inspire the young, even into old age. Hillary's running for president, and if you do nominate her, I don't think they can stop her.
Our duty is fulfilled in service, never tiring, never yielding, never finishing. We renew that purpose today to make our country more just and generous, to affirm the dignity of our lives and every life.
It has been the honor of my life to serve you. I won't stop. Today, I'm really coming as a brother, but also to create a larger context for what's possible.
Well, I'm joined now by Jared Cohen, President of Global Affairs at Goldman Sachs, and author of Life After Power, 7 Presidents and Their Search for Purpose Beyond the White House. Jared, it's always so good to see you. I mean, this is, you're also, I must say, a New York Times bestseller, but this is a really interesting sort of a deep dive into 7 presidents that you focus on. It's a persistent and difficult question, isn't it? What happens to these presidents after the most important job in the world?
That's right. I mean, look, Yalda, we're all plagued with this question, or this elusive question of what do we do next? And, it's a question we're going to ask many times in our lives, not just when we're sort of staring retirement in the eyes. And we look at CEOs, we look at athletes, but we never look at the most dramatic transition in the world, which is, being president of the United States and coming back down to earth as kind of an ordinary person. And they have a harder time topping what they did last than anyone else. And so what the book does is I take 7 U.S. presidents who each got after this question of what do we do next in a very different way. And I take these seemingly unrelatable figures and I make their lessons prescriptive for the rest of us.
Yeah, I mean, you explore issues, very human issues, like ego, their finances, and I guess most importantly, their legacy.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And by the way, I spent 8 hours interviewing George W. Bush on the record. It's the longest interview anyone's done with him about his post-presidency. And we dug into this question of legacy because he's managed to detach and move on from politics in a way that defies the human brain and seems like a neurological impossibility. And he's the only president that I'm aware of who's left the White House and actually achieved a level of happiness. And he has this quarrelsome attitude about legacy. He can't for the life of him understand why we would sacrifice the president in service of trying to achieve something that we're not going to live to see. And he tells me, I read 3 books about George Washington last year. By the time they get around to the other George, I'm going to be long gone. So he has this very adversarial view of investing in one's legacy. And he's managed to double his popularity in the time that he's left office while investing less in his legacy and his reputation than any of his active contemporaries.
It's also an interesting way to look at the relationship between current president and ex-president, because it can either be one where they can benefit from each other, they can turn into an ally, someone they can seek counsel from, or it can be someone who can become a burden almost.
Well, that's absolutely right, Yalda. And look, if we go back to America's founding fathers, they didn't have a lot of good examples of the peaceful transfer of power. So they worried about this question of what to do with ex-presidents. And, Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers, he asked this question, does it promote the well-being and stability of America to have half a dozen men who'd served as president basically wandering around the rest of us like discontented ghosts? And almost 250 years after the founding fathers drafted the Constitution, we kind of have an answer to that question. I mean, look no further than 2024. Ex-presidents can either be tremendous allies and partners to their successors, or they can be their most formidable adversary.
And we have this extraordinary situation now, don't we, Jared, where we've got 2 presidents, one former president head to head with another, and both of them, this whole discussion about age, it very much feels like to the voter, like a back to the future situation.
Absolutely. And look, I have a chapter in the book called The Comeback. It's about the only other time in American history that we've had a rematch between 2 presidents of the United States, which was 1892. So 132 years ago, Grover Cleveland came back after leaving office to challenge the incumbent Benjamin Harrison. The founding fathers would be appalled that in 2024, we're experiencing the only other time that that's happening, a rematch between 2 presidents. There's several key differences, though, Yalda. One, we have the 2 oldest candidates in history involved in this rematch, eclipsed only by themselves 4 years ago. And I think you kind of have to ask the question, why are we in this situation? How have we gone so terribly off script in terms of the evolution of our political system? And I think you have to sort of wonder, do you have 2 presidents that don't want to give up power?
Yeah, really fascinating thought there. The fact that you've got two presidents and they don't want to give up power. A really interesting way to look at it. Jared, really grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us. Author of Life After Power: 7 Presidents and Their Search for Purpose Beyond the White House.
Thank you, Yalda.
Well, that's it for tonight's programme. Dominic Waghorn will be in the hot seat for the rest of the week. I'll be back again next Monday at 9 p.m. Make sure you tune in tomorrow night and for the rest of the week. The news at 10 is coming up next. Good night.